So the topic today is the sixth area of living the awakened heart. So those of you who've been following these talks will know that we have been jumping about a bit, that it's all based on this, the day out in living the awakened heart. And there's 6 areas of teaching, really, teaching activity that you find in all forms of Buddhism, and including the Awakened Heart Sangha. So you're familiar with discovering the heart of Buddhism and trusting the heart of Buddhism, which are exploratory and setting you up, giving you the background you need for understanding these 6 areas of practice. And you can use these different practices to practice and to deepen your understanding of discovering the heart of Buddhism and trusting the heart of Buddhism. So it all feeds into one spiral learning process, as it were. And as I said on other occasions, as Western Buddhists, I think we all come in with the same sense of the importance of love and compassion. It's in our society already. It's our underpinning value that, we might not live up to it, but it is something, nobody disputes it. If you think, love and compassion is what's important, nobody's going to argue with you. They might think, but we don't live up to that much, but, somebody who's good is loving and compassionate, and it's important. So then what's special about Buddhism tends to be, we're drawn as Westerners to Buddhism often, I find more often than not, by a sense that it's about a truth or reality, about the nature of reality that leads to deeper understanding. I think people are not always so sure they believe in liberation or enlightenment, but they definitely want deeper understanding and a sense of truth, insight and truth. So that's we pursue that in our meditation and in our discussions about the nature of reality and emptiness and dreamlike nature of experience or impermanence and suffering. These are all ways of gaining insight into truth, which we sense is good in itself, I think, and has some connection with love and compassion, but it's not very clear what. Not in the Western mind, I don't think. And then we have a sense that Buddhism is going to give us a path that we can pursue in our life, that we can apply in our daily life, that will enable us to live a more skillful life by being more aware, being more sensitive and you could say ethical, these kind of things. So those are the first 3 areas that we've explored. I think Tara went through the 3rd one when she gave her talk. And the next talk was my talk on Vasta Vision. And I noticed it's I started off always calling it Vasta Vision and have continued to call it Vasta Vision. But in the book it's changed its name. I can't remember how that happened. And it's not referred to as Vasta Vision, it's referred to as, you see, I never can remember. I think, nature of being. I think it's the sense that our being is vaster than we think. So somehow, I think I'll change the next version. I'll change it back because I still haven't stopped calling it Vasta Vision. And then, of course, it doesn't say it in the book. But not all Western Buddhists go for the Vasta Vision. They don't necessarily believe in past and future lives. They don't necessarily believe that what they do in this life is going to affect the next life. Therefore, they don't necessarily believe there's such a thing as enlightenment and liberation from the cycle of rebirth in samsara. There's a lot of Western Buddhists who don't go for any of that. but they still call themselves Buddhists, and they still live a Buddhist life of love and compassion and developing insight and applying it in their lives. So, but they don't go further than that. So I made this a very definite step in our Buddhist life, is when we realise that actually there is this vaster vision, that it's not just about this life, and therefore it's about death as well as life. It's not just about having a peaceful death, it's about preparing yourself for your next life so that you can continue your progress towards enlightenment through the death process. So it's quite radical to find you've actually taken on this cosmic view of I was going to say Eastern Buddhism, but in the countries of origin, these kind of ideas were not that strange, but they're not mainstream in the West. And that has all sorts of implications to one's whole attitude to practice. It's not just about being more aware in this life and being, which of course it is, but it's not just that. It's about setting yourself up, setting your course through, and your intention through all your future lives, and through processes which go from life to life, which don't make any sense unless things do go from life to life, which we'll be looking at in a minute. So on the basis of this vaster vision, we can go into the fifth area, which is making pranidhanas, which I think is called, developing the power of intention. It's more than just the power of our intention. It is developing that, but it's also using it to change the world, really, to change the universe. That from the point of view of the vaster vision, everything is actually intention drives the whole thing. So what drives the shape our life takes is our intentions and actions of body, speech and mind in our past lives. And what we do in this life shapes what we will encounter in future lives. So that's fundamental to this outlook. Therefore, if you make a very strong and powerful intention towards awakening, towards benefiting all beings, towards staying on the path to awakening in this life, then wherever you find yourself next life, that intention will still carry on. So it becomes the most important thing you can be doing in your life, really, is learning how to make skillful pranidhanas that will carry you through. You could say, well, it's good karmic action on the, mental action. You could express it just like that, in its simplest form. But I think in the West we need to have it spelled out that we have this power of intention, which is strengthened by the more we are true to our word. If we're true to our intention, true to our word, if we keep to it, we build up a strength that then goes with us from life to life. And if we weaken our word by promising things and then just forgetting about it, or making commitments and then pretending we haven't, we weaken ourselves all the time, so that we can't be sure if we say we'll do something that we will. And neither can anyone else. So the universe also becomes distrustful. So your whole mandala becomes weakened by that. I'll come back to mandala in a minute. So this is, of course, everybody can make good wishes. They don't have to have these beliefs to make good wish, but it becomes a sort of, like wishful thinking, doesn't it? Oh, I wish everyone was happy. I wish I could make everyone happy. I wish I could reach enlightenment to make everyone happy. Oh, that's such a nice sentiment. But we're not talking about sentiment here. We're talking about reality. That we have that power within us because of our Buddha nature. We have the power within us to work forever, benefiting beings wherever they are. We have that power. I mean, we don't realize it now because we don't realize emptiness. And because we don't realize emptiness, we can't generate the compassion that would require, because we can't believe that it's possible for a start. So we suffer compassion fatigue. Oh, I can't bear any more of this suffering. Sort of. But if you realize emptiness, then you realize, oh, actually, I have this power of compassion, and on the basis of that, I can intentionally direct my body, speech, and mind actions towards benefiting beings. And so the Bodhisattva's main occupation is to become more and more skillful at making pranidhanas and in being able to fulfill them. So in the Mahayana, in the sutras, there's a lot of discussion about the power of pranidhanas, and we recite the Samantabhadracharya pranidhana on special occasions because this is said to be the most powerful and all-inclusive and covering all contingency type of pranidhana. So I talked about that slightly last time. I didn't go into it as a separate topic, and I'm not going into it as a separate topic this time either, because I'm skipping to the next topic, which is, I've forgotten what I called it originally, but now it's called Strengthening Our Connections to the Mandala of Awakening, which is, that's good enough. It's it covers areas that relate to ritual. We tend to think of rituals as maybe something a little bit clunky and, take it or leave it. It's okay, there's a stupa you can walk around, and money wheels you can turn, and there's prayers you can join in with or not join in with. Kind of, I don't usually find they're the driving energy behind people's conviction when they're practicing Dharma as Westerners. It's something they might like to engage in, especially when they can't think what else to do. But if you look in Buddhist countries, this is their major preoccupation. I mean, I've just called it loosely rituals for the time being, but in a Buddhist country, if you thought of, Dharma, probably the first thing you'd think of was receiving some power, or what we call adhisthana, blessing, grace. So, they might first thing they might do is just go, thinking of the Dharma and greeting it or acknowledging it, and yes. So they're going to do something related to the Dharma. They're going to go and, inverted commas, worship. They're going to go to a temple or to a shrine or to a holy person or holy place or holy object, some sacred thing, and they will approach it with a sense of approaching the sacred and touch it some way or other. I mean, this isn't just in Buddhism. I mean, this seems to be a human instinct. Even people who don't have any beliefs, but as soon as you reach any kind of religion, that's always an element in it. A very strong sense of approaching the sacred and receiving some sort of power from it, some benevolent power that you're kind of opening yourself to it and being influenced by it. So that power, that sense of being influenced by some powerful reality is what's meant by adhisthana. Where does that come from? How does that relate to anything? We tend to think, well, in Buddhism, we're looking for the true nature of mind, and we tend to think, of my mind. And it's, Buddha nature, it's my Buddha nature. So, sitting in meditation, looking at the nature of mind, resting in the true nature, and so on, that seems to make sense. But then to go and touch a stupa, or walk around a stupa, why? What connection does that have? Where's that getting your power from? I mean, that doesn't have Buddha nature, does it? I mean, how does that come into the equation? But actually, it's very profound, because we do think of the world as out there, as separate from us, don't we? You know, I'm in the world with my Buddha nature, and the world's out there, and I don't know what it is, but I think it's probably material. Or then if I know a bit more science, I think, oh, well, it's probably atoms and quarks and mathematical formula and all sorts of weird things. But fundamentally, it's out there. Whereas when we understand emptiness better, we realise actually it doesn't mean anything to say out there. And it doesn't mean anything to say it's separate. And in the section about insight, we explore that in some detail. You know, like, how do we know it's not separate? Well, you can look and you can see and you can tell. There's no way that it can be separate. So therefore, it's all of a piece. The external and the internal, you know, what I call it, internal and external, they're all of a piece, and they're all Buddha nature in a sense. So when Buddhas become enlightened and awakened, it's like the world becomes awakened, but I still can't see it. Still don't see it. I don't see my own awakened nature. I don't see the awakened nature of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And I don't see the true nature of the world. I can't see any of that. But in a strange way, as humans, we seem to be able to intuit that sacredness. I find that very interesting. Even in this day and age, people still are drawn to sacred places, sacred sites, sacred, even the idea of the sacred, a sense of entering with a sense of awe, being, you know, you enter a cathedral, or you go into a place that has some special awe-inspiring quality, and we have this what is it? An intuition of something grand, and that kind of blows our concepts away, that touches our hearts, that kind of affects us very deeply. And that's, in a sense, that's coming to us. We encounter that as other, even though it's not separate. You can't say there's any separation between my ability to appreciate it and what it is I'm appreciating. But I don't really care about any of that when I'm in the presence of the sacred, or however we encounter that. And it also seems to be instinctive that we recognize connection. I mean, souvenirs have always been a major industry. It seems, when you look in any culture, this idea that I have something from that sacred place and I keep it with me and keeps my connection with it. I want to go and live there, I want to go there, I want to go on a pilgrimage there. I want to relate to it somehow, or somebody else has been there and they bring me something from there. It can be something that's not what we would normally call sacred at all. I mean, you know, if it's your pop idol or your favourite film star or whatever, still you see people doing exactly the same thing. You know, they take their, what do they call it, memorabilia, you know, and I'm sure they would take their relics if they could. Yeah. That sense of a connection. And it's a strange, you know, when you think about it, it's strange that we feel connection like that. You know, people don't have to have a special set of beliefs about connection to be fully involved in it. I mean, I'm quite fascinated by that. I watch some of these documentaries about to what lengths people will go and the amount of money people will pay just to have a connection. You know, like some memorabilia of the Beatles or something. You know, they can sell for fantastic sums of money. What is that instinctive feeling of, it's a material thing, it's not them, so why should you feel it has a connection with them? And yet, you know, in our stupa we have memorabilia, we've got relics of great saints from the Buddhist tradition. And when I walk around the stupa and think about that, I feel a sense of wonder that actually somehow I'm sharing their world. Somehow this connects me to their world. That's something from their world that they experienced, that they were present, could be, 1,000 years ago. This is their cup, or a piece of their cup, or a little trace of the stuff that's stuck on the inside of their cup. And actually, it's actually in our stupa now. That is Milarepa. That is something that was with Milarepa at the time of Milarepa. Even just thinking that brings Milarepa somehow into my world in a way I can't quite put my finger on. Sort of becomes present in my world. When you think about, well, how is anything present in my world? Actually, it's the same process. So it's true. We tend to think, well, our world is something defined, but when you look at it, it isn't. It isn't defined except by our own sense of connection with it. So if something that we hold very sacred is in the center of our world, then we really are connected with it. And there's nothing to say that isn't a true connection. And this is the other element in this section of the training. You're talking about the adhisthana, or the blessing, that's coming through connection with sacred objects. But connection becomes the operative word here. What does it mean? Well, that's asking a question deeper than we can answer right here, but I could give you some thoughts about it that I find interesting. Like I was talking to Lisa yesterday about points. Well, I'm always talking to you about points, aren't I? But when you think of a point, and you kind of, just in your ordinary way of thinking of points, like you're going to put something in a certain spot, you're going to put it there at that point, or you're finding a place on a map, that place, or, a design, it's that point, that place, okay. So exactly that place, the single point of that place, you can get nearer and nearer. You sort of start with a dot, and then you think, well, that's not actually one point, that's lots of points. So how small would it be if it was just one point? And then you realise gradually, as you think about it, you might think quickly, but even if you think it quickly, the more you contemplate it, the stranger it seems to me, is however small I get, that can always be as many points again. I mean, this is just me thinking in my ordinary common sense way of thinking about points. And then I realised that actually a point, if it has any dimensions, is always going to have as many points as you want. You can always find more points in divide and divide up and divide up and divide up, and you never arrive at none. But as long as there's any point at all, it will have dimensions, and therefore it could be any number of points. So I really loved contemplating this, because then I think it's so obvious to me that the space is made up of points. That point is completely different from the next point, completely different from the next point. They're all different points. But I can't find any of them, because they don't have dimensions. So how can what doesn't have dimensions create a space? Kind of like, and how can they join together and make a line? Without a line, you don't have a dimension, but as soon as you've got but how do you create a line out of something that doesn't have dimensions? And yet, if you put one dot next to the next dot, next dot, next dot, you get a line. So you're making, in a way, how can you join things that don't have dimensions? They can't join. And yet, my whole world that I'm experiencing is made up of a space in which everything's joined. Each thing's joined to the next thing. But actually, it can't be. There can't be any joining, because that would mean they were separate. And if they were separate, there would be single things that were separate, and I can't find a single thing that's separate. So you could say, well, this is just your conceptual mind struggling to understand something. If you don't try to conceptualize it too heavily, it all works. You can make measurements, you can design houses, you can use points and lines and dimensions. You don't need to think about it in such detail, which is curious, isn't it? If you don't think about it too much, it works. If you think about it too much, it doesn't work. So what is it? What is this world I've constructed? And what does it mean to bring one point near to another point? What does that mean? And this comes into this here. What does it mean to make a connection? And the idea here is that you make a connection in this life that goes forward into your future lives. Now, what's that about? You know, how can what happens in this life translate into something that happens to another being in another life? You know, this is the argument for saying, oh, well, there can't be future lives. But it's also the argument for saying that life is totally meaningless, because the next moment I'm not the same person as this person now, and so what does it matter? What does any of it matter? It applies right to this life, right here and now. So you can ignore it. We're quite good at ignoring, but if you look, you think, actually, there's no grounds for thinking. If what I do now is the direction of my life through this life, then what I do now, and it's inexplicable, you can't really explain how that has any meaning or purpose at all, really. And yet, everything in me tells me that's not true. Actually, beings are important. Beings are full of meaning. Life is full of meaning. And if it's full of meaning, then it must mean connections mean something, even though I can't find any way that anything could possibly connect to anything else. So connections still mean something, it's just I don't understand what they mean. So I really enjoy thinking about that. Because then, if I think about what I feel in my heart about my connection with other beings, I notice I actually feel it means something to me that we're all connected. It means so much to me, I don't even care what anyone might say against it. I wouldn't care, because I know it matters. I know you all matter, and I matter, and what all this is about matters. It does matter. And it's actually about connection in the heart. I say in the heart because actually, linguistically, one can get away with it. You know, what we really mean when we say that is something that it goes beyond words, doesn't it? When we say that, if you say it in a way that is not, which is flippant and doesn't mean anything, it's like really like sacrilege, isn't it? You just don't want to get anywhere near a conversation like that. You know, it's just like, oof. But then when you actually explore it within your experience, could I honestly say I don't know what it means to hold someone in my heart? And I can't honestly say I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means. You know, I couldn't tell you what it meant. But yeah, that really touches something fundamental about what it is to be any kind of being, but especially to be a human being. So that's what we're talking about when we go towards the sacred and we make a connection. We're talking about a connection that goes beyond ordinary ideas we have about connections and links into something that we intuitively sense about the meaningfulness of connections. And as I said, this worldview, this vast vision of what existence is at all, which is not restricted to this life, not even restricted to this species or even this world even. It's something that we're intrinsic to, but it isn't. Yeah, you couldn't limit it in any way. There's some sort of connectedness, which to me goes together with a sense of totality and all of a piece. Everything is all of a piece, so that, and also interpenetrating, so that we are connected at a deep level that we can't grasp conceptually. And I find that deeply satisfying and meaningful to live in to have such a worldview, really. And within that, there is this sense that it might be possible then for, as we take the Bodhisattva vow, or take refuge, take the Bodhisattva vow, if we do all interpenetrate, and we do have this connection which goes beyond words, and which is ultimately meaningful, and which is about love and compassion, maybe there is this power of Adhisthana in each of us. We each have this power to bring peace and happiness to all beings. It's intrinsic to our nature, and that actually interpenetrates all other beings, so they must be influenced by that's within us. And as we realize that more, that power will unfold more. Therefore, it would be possible, if you made that wish to bring all beings to awakening, it would be possible to become that source of Adhisthana that brings all beings to awakening. So, how would I do that? If I were an awakened being, how would I bring others to awakening? You can think, well, I'd have to be born in the world and learn Dharma and teach it. That'd be one way. But supposing you're looking at beings who can't receive the Dharma, they're not interested, or they don't have, there's not the situation where they could actually be taught Dharma. What could you do to help them? What would bring Dharma into their world? What would bring that connection into their world? You make things. So this is one of the things that enlightened beings do. They make things like stupas and Buddha images and temples and prayer flags and money wheels, and they make all sorts of things that beings can come in touch with. So people can come, they can turn the money wheel just out of curiosity, oh, this turns, look, and they've actually made a connection with the pranidhanas and the adhisthana of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that have gone into the mantras that are inside the money wheel. So they think of all sorts of skillful ways of touching beings. So the prayer flags, the idea is that the wind blows over the prayer flag, and that has the symbols of the word of the Buddha on it, and then that blows into the environment, and then beings breathe in the air and it goes into them, and they're connected to the word of the Buddha through the flag. And it's maybe just a slight connection, but it's enough to generate a further connection. And then the further connection is enough to generate a further connection, and so it goes on. Whatever the connection means, it's clearly quite mysterious what a connection means, but it'll do as a temporary marker of meaning, that we make a connection through breathing in the word of the Buddha from the letters on the prayer flag. You can say it, even though you might think, and you can actually act as if you understand what it means by putting up prayer flags and thinking about them in a certain way as you put them up, and having them infused with adhisthana through a ritual. So the more you think about it, and the more you bring your intention to bear on it, the more you bring your pranidhanas to bear on it, the more conviction with which you do it, the more you recognize the emptiness of it, and therefore the limitless possibilities of it, the more you bring that understanding into it, the more that can communicate itself or influence the beings and the environment around it. So it's an empowering principle, really. You're taking that world view, you're taking the power of your pranidhanas, and now you're actually empowering the world around you, and it's empowering you, which has a lot to do with the mandala principle, for those who are already familiar with it, that we constantly are creating and entering mandalas. And those mandalas don't exist in time and space, actually. Okay, we represent them in time and space, but in themselves, they don't belong to time and space. That's why they can go from life to life. So you could almost say every action that you do is a mandala, because there's a starting intention that comes through body, speech, and mind, which then goes into the environment, there's some energy or influence goes into the environment, and that affects it, and that then brings back some sort of response to the center of the mandala, which again is empowered, and it sort of, this kind of going out and coming in energy of a mandala is happening all the time. And again, it's not in time and space, although you can think of it as if it were, until you think too carefully. If you then analyze too much, you end up with it all falling apart. If you don't analyze too much, you sort of get a sense of it, and you get enough of a sense of it to know how to act. So if you get a sense of, okay, the stupa is the center of a mandala, a lot of good, powerful pranidhanas went into the stupa, a lot of connections, lots of connections with the teachers of the lineage, their relics and the mantras and the prayers and objects, images and precious substances and offerings, and all gathered in that place at that time. That has created the center of a mandala. As soon as you get that sense, as you approach it, you find there's a sort of protective circle around it that's telling you, oh, this is a place where I should pay attention. This is not a place that I should treat disrespectfully. So and if other people are behaving that way too, it becomes very, very obvious that this is a place that somehow, because of everyone's attitude towards it, and because of its intrinsic reality, it can actually have a powerful effect on those who come near it. And even if they're not particularly thinking about it, it can have a strong effect on those who come near it. And then there's a natural sense of, oh, I should be doing something here that's meaningful. And the idea of making a wish in front of a sacred place it does again seem to be instinctive, that this is a place to make a special wish. I mean, okay, we've got wishing wells, and you've got all sorts of situations where we have customs where you say, oh, now this is the time to make a wish. But it's the same instinct. Oh, no, this is a place, if I make a wish here, it will be particularly powerful. And if I give something, I do something with my body, speech and mind, like if I do a prostration, if I actually bow, or I just greet it, or even go down on my knees, or if I offer something, like something that I find beautiful or that's precious, and I put it in front of the stupa, and somehow that creates an energy exchange so that I really feel that I've interacted with the sacred. And this is so standard across all, the whole world really, whether people are religious or not. Like you've appreciated a performance on the stage, and you want to stand up, you want to clap, you want to sort of throw flowers or something. It's because it's real. That's how mandalas work. That's how you interact. That's why it's so much more fun being a live audience than being on something on screen, isn't it? Because you're actually creating it by being there. It's a very real instinct. So this is what lies behind all these customs that you get in Buddhist countries, where you get pilgrimages, holy places, stupas, images, prayer flags, prayer wheels. What have I got? I've written a list of things I could think of. Oh yes, even just going into the presence of a holy person, right across the Buddhist world. If you want to do something, you suddenly want to make a connection with the Dharma, you're very likely to go and make offerings to bhikkhus because they represent the Sangha. And it's not because you think of them particularly as your teacher, but because they carry the power of the Adhisthana of the Buddha's teaching. So you make a connection with them. So you offer them. Typically, you would offer them food. It's good. Food's good because it keeps getting consumed, so it doesn't accumulate and get in the way. It can just be eaten. Flowers are quite good too because they die. But if you gave gold and silver, they did have a big problem in India at one time because they got so much treasure offered to the stupa, they had to have big houses built full of treasure. So of course, in the end, it all got stolen. That's why you have this vow in the Bodhisattva vow: do not steal from the 3 jewels, because all these offerings were accumulating around the stupas, and then people would try and steal them, and then say that's stealing from the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. So, because you think, well, who would steal from the 3 jewels? Well, that's an example of how something like that could happen. So this idea of participating, and another way of participating is to say something, to say prayers, chant, mantras. So a lot of chanting goes on. That's something that one could do on a regular basis. And every time you chant something, you make a stronger connection. So even if it's just, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha, there's a sense in which every time you say it, you're putting an imprint in the universe that's connecting you and anybody that's connected with you to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So the more times it's said, the stronger that connection is. And you could say, well, materially, in what sense is it stronger? When you die, your body dies. How can that have affected anything in the future? But, if you think too literally, as I said, you find even this life falls apart. You have to kind of you have to go by a kind of intuition that does make sense. When somebody's dying and you're making prayers for them, you get a feeling that they're really important. You don't think to yourself, well, it's just their body dying, it doesn't matter. You could, couldn't you? Materialists could think that. Well, it's just their body, it doesn't matter. But you don't hear people saying that. Even materialistic people, even people who don't believe in anything, they just don't say that. Because they sense something else. They sense their heart connection. That's what we feel, don't we? This person really matters, and as they die, you notice that their body isn't them. I mean, even animals notice this. Their body isn't them. So if you're making connections for them, it doesn't matter about their body. Okay, as long as their body's there, then it's like having a relic there, isn't it? It's like you've got some connection through the body. But when their body's not there, you've still got the same connection. And you might just, and people do, they go to the place where the person's body lies, don't they? They go to the grave. And it's very important to people. I always find this very interesting, how passionate people feel about the body of a loved one, and if they never see it or they never have contact with it after they die, they're left in tremendous distress. I find that really interesting, not because I don't believe it, but because these people have no other belief that would make that important. So I think they're right that it is important, but they're sensing something very important about that loved one and their connection with them, aren't they? You know, what they call it, I want closure, don't they? What happened to my loved one? Where's their body? It's like, from one point of view, you can think it's just stupid, but we take it terribly seriously, don't we? I mean, as a Buddhist, perhaps you take it less seriously than the rest of the world, but I think for the rest of if you don't have any belief, it throws that into relief when the body disappears without you ever seeing it again. It throws the mysteriousness of that connection into relief, that you cannot explain why that matters to you. So you sort of think, well, if I found the body, then it would somehow give me closure. I could somehow understand it a bit, because there's the body and it's dead, so I can sort of understand. But if I can't see the body dead and they've gone, I still feel the connection. Again, this word connection. But what is it you're really feeling? And you could say, oh, well, it's just sentimental. But I think that would be to denigrate our connection with each other, wouldn't it? To say it's just sentimental. I mean, a lot of it is, but at the heart of it, there's a real intuition that our connection with each other is the most important thing, actually. What else is important? As I said before, I'm always struck when there's a hijack of a plane or something, and everybody in their last moment, what do? They ring their loved ones and tell them they love them. They're just going to die, so what? Nobody thinks that, do they? It's some instinct that there's something more real behind what's superficially we're taking to be real. And that's what these rituals are about. They're about that world where we connect, where our actions do have an effect. Actions of body, speech and mind, directed by our pranidhanas, making these connections, even though in a way they just symbolize something that's even deeper. And that actually does produce an effect that goes from life to life. So even though you might not be able to see an effect in this life, like what effect did it have? I prayed for these people, and what effect did it have? Actually, in the real world, it had a tremendous effect, and you will reap the results of that effect as you go from life to life. But in this world, you could think, well, it didn't do any good, they still died. Not going to do it next time. That would be sad, wouldn't it? Or maybe not. But I'm convinced it would be very sad. I'm convinced it would be very sad. So the power of the adhisthana is actually the power of all those connections that we have that we can't explain. That is, if you like, intrinsic to the nature of reality or the nature of the universe. And you could say, on one hand, they're empty, but that's what makes them real. Because if they could be grasped as something, then they couldn't connect together like points. If you make a point into something, you can't link them together because they never meet. But if you actually just relax and allow yourself to think there are all these distinct points, but there's none of them has any dimensions, so somehow there's all these connections, but none of those connections can be pinned down in any way. Actually, you're talking about reality, but you're talking about something that you're intuiting, but the words are not actually very accurate. They kind of help. They kind of lead to the right action, but they're also a bit misleading at the same time. So those were the. Well, then the fourth thing that you could say is that these actions, very strongly intentional actions directed towards welfare, well-being and enlightenment, connected to powerful sacred people and things, and then you've got that connection, you've got that power of adhisthana, and then this going from life to life element is what's meant by punya. So often we say we dedicate this punya, we dedicate this, often translated as merit, but we're generating a certain power by means of these actions of body, speech and mind. And you could even say every action you make is a kind of ritual, you know. That's why when we make a food offering, we turn that into a ritual. You could turn every action that you make into a ritual with that awareness that it is directed towards awakening. A lot of the time, rituals are directed towards something quite small and limited, but it doesn't. It just takes a difference in attitude to make every action turn into a ritual action, which is leading or taking you towards awakening, bringing all beings to awakening. So you come in and you treat the room as a sacred place. You approach the shrine. You bow or you prostrate. You light some candles. You make an offering, and then you're thinking to yourself, this is an example of how I could make my whole life into a ritual action that is taking me to awakening. And each action adds up. So even though in some ways you can't really trace how anything goes from life to life, in fact, every time you do an action, you're kind of you're creating and entering a mandala. Every time you create and enter it, you're reinforcing it, and that reinforced mandala is then something that you will encounter again in this life or future lives. And as you encounter it, then that same attitude will tend to manifest. You will create it and enter it and continue to reinforce it. So when you look at all the unfortunate places you might end up in, there's so many terrible places that we even see in this world, let alone in the other realms of samsara, where we could find ourselves, we died, this body's gone, we might suddenly find ourselves in another world with some strange, what we call karmic situation, but it's actually a mandala that's been created by ourselves together with other people, but that, there we are. If we remember, we can turn this into a ritual which is actually leading to awakening, we will definitely find ourselves in a world which is leading to awakening. So we can actually ensure our own future as a Dharma practitioner by the way we're acting in this world. And the more you practice like that, the more convincing it becomes. And so that would be like accumulating punya. I mean, it's not as if it's something that you accumulate, but in our ordinary way of thinking, if you accumulate a lot of money, you have a lot of money to spend. If you accumulate a lot of actions of body, speech and mind directed to awakening, then you will have a lot of resources for arriving at awakening. You will keep on the path to awakening. So accumulating punya is a major industry in Buddhist countries. That's sort of, I think, I've told you many times that when living with my Tibetan friends, the turn of phrase, gathering punya, sounds like real good idea. Really good idea. It's not like, oh, you should do good. Oh, yes, I should do good. Oh, yeah, I'm not doing well enough, blah, blah. They don't think like that. They think, oh, here's an opportunity to accumulate punya. Yeah, this is punya is good news. Punya means I'm going to, it's going to go from life to life. It's going to benefit myself and others. Money, forget it. I want punya. And they will. That's why they can give so generously. Because, money's not going to be when they die. Holding money is actually going to harm them when they die. So, give it away, and then you've got all that punya. Feels much more secure, much better insurance policy. It sounds a bit materialistic, but then we think in materialistic ways, don't we? And this is, even if somebody's doing it with a sense of, oh, this is an insurance policy to protect myself and my family, you think, well, that's not a pure motive. It may not be a pure motive, but it's a good thing to be doing. So, yeah. So does anyone want to ask anything?
Yeah, you're talking about the points, the dot.
Oh, yes, I like my points.
And then there was something that came up for me very strongly in my meditation today. And as you were talking about, and because I am in the openness book, I was just wondering if when we are practicing openness, all these thoughts and feelings and sensations could almost like be represented as little dots of this continuum of openness. Because I can be quite overwhelmed sometimes by my experience, whatever it is. Almost like another dot, another dot, Christina or Joka, another dot. If I thought in that, so I don't know if I'm thinking in the right direction, but it helps me to let go of that somehow.
It's interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, because I just had this very strong thing about openness today. Maybe because I was here meditating with everybody rather than at home.
Maybe it's a bit
off.
Maybe it's a bit like we describe in the mandala section about the A and the VAM. So whenever you have a thought, it's like triggers a whole world, doesn't it? Like if you just have a thought of, I don't know, somebody's name or something you've seen. It isn't just one little thought, is it? It's like a whole world suddenly comes with it, like its past, its future, your relationship with it, its flavour, everything about it is suddenly triggered by remembering it. And I mean, you think about, and I look into my experience of if I remember something, it always starts with some sort of little trace of a smell or a taste or a flavour. I don't mean literally of the senses, but sort of mental flavour of, oh, I was going to think about something. Oh, that's it. And then suddenly it just is all of a piece. And that really, to me, that fits the description of a mandala. But it starts with a little tiny movement almost. I don't know if movement's the right word. A little something. And as you say, if you tried to analyse that, you wouldn't find anything, would you? So it is like it's that point of origin of something, and then it's mysterious because that point of origin doesn't have dimensions. And yet that world opens up, and that world is really important. As you enter that world, it's like that is the only world until you think, oh, I don't choose to be here. And then you can choose not to be there. And it just collapses again. It's like a bubble just bursts, isn't it? If you try to think, where did it go? Don't know. And then, how can I stop it coming up again? Well, as soon as you think of it, it keeps coming back, doesn't it? Yeah. But actually, if you don't think of it, it isn't anywhere. That's our life. All the meaning of our life is just like bubbles. But what in what? There's something there, isn't there, that has value. Underneath that, there's something that has value. So that if you let that go, you sense something coming alive inside you, don't you? If you really let it go, there's a sense of relief or something alive that isn't dependent on bubbles being in it. So that's the contrast that we're faced with all the time. What's that I can rest in, really, that's more alive and real and the bubbles, which actually, if I notice them as bubbles, they're not a problem. But if I don't, if I get lost in it, that could become quite problematic, couldn't it? Either because I don't want to let it go, so I've sucked into it, or because I do want to let it go and I can't make it go away. Very interesting. The most interesting thing you can be doing in life is meditating, I think. I find. It's not true, because actually, if you could recognize there's no distinction between meditation and non-meditation, that wouldn't be true anymore, would it? Although I suppose you could argue that's because everything's become meditation. Anything else? Yeah.
This isn't a terribly formed question. But I was just thinking about, I suppose in a sense, in the same way that we're awake and we're asleep, and I've been having a bit of a dozy time, but that just that you're going in and out of states of awake and asleep, and it's kind of interesting to blur the lines between being awake and asleep and bringing awakeness into sleep and your dreams into awakeness. I wondered about, that with aliveness and death, really. Are there practices where the distinction between being alive and being dead is, because in a sense, if you're thinking of countless rebirths on that scale, I suppose it's different scales in a way.
In a way, yeah.
I just wondered are there other ways that...
Yeah, I mean, death is a kind of non-event in a way. If you can get to the point where it's really not such a big event, then, you've made some progress. Because the only reason why it's such a big event is because we become attached to this particular world, which seems to us so different, and we identify with it that this is us, and then this is going to end, then what? But if you realise, this is just bubbles of meaning, and what I'm doing is influencing all future lives and all beings, and I'll do that whether I'm alive or dead. No, not much, substantially, there's no particular difference. Yeah. That leads to equanimity, doesn't it? Everything becomes equally meaningful, rather than everything becomes equally meaningless. Everything becomes equally meaningful.
Forgive me if this is a ridiculous question. I somehow, through reading your death book, and that as long as you trust in the path of awakening, so you take a refuge, and even if you forget that at the moment of death, it's still there. And also about, even if we just
read the pranidhana without understanding it yet. It has life.
Mm.
And I was just sat there and I just laughed. And I said, and I don't know if this is so, but I laughed and I thought, enlightenment is inescapable.
That's right, it is.
Right, okay.
And we're working very hard. We're working very hard to escape it.
Yeah.
We're working very hard to forget it, you know, like, oh no, that seems too hard work. I think I'll do something else.
It's inescapable.
That's right.
So it's like cooperation.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're being only asked to cooperate, actually.
Okay.
Is that too much to ask? Mm.
Because I did know that even in the hell realm, it does come to an end. It's like there is no nothing. You know, there's no absolute nothing somehow, which is different from emptiness.
That's right, there's nothing different from emptiness, that's right. So even in hell, you have to work quite hard to maintain it. I mean, you don't think it's you that's maintaining it, but you are actually maintaining it, because if you actually had a moment of realization, you would realize it wasn't real.
I like it. Indestructible heart and inescapable.
That's right. We're working very hard to stave it off. No, not yet, not yet. I want enlightenment, but not yet. Yes?
I'm also quite obsessed with points of singularity,
Right.
and I just wonder that I often come to this feeling of the cyclical nature of reality, and
So I missed a word there. Which nature?
cyclical.
Oh, cyclical.
There's no,
Right, okay.
There's no beginning, and
Right,
so
right.
I'm really nervous. And this always trying to imagine this point of singularity, but because in terms of the Big Bang thing, that it's just completely a cycle. So there is, and as I get deeper into it, there's no beginning, and there's actually no end. So there's no start of the breath, and there's no end of the breath, and it just, and the point just disappears. So I don't know whether I was on the right track of that. It's just another concept. That there can't be a point if there's no beginning, no ending.
It's strange. You could say there can't be a point, and yet we live in a world where we're using points of reference all the time. So what do they correspond to in reality? The relationship between what we think of as the world. Like, what is that, and how does that relate to the nature of our own awareness or consciousness or mind? These are all related, aren't they? They all kind of. So it's thinking about it on any level helps to kind of drop some of your concepts, and then I think as Westerners we tend to really be looking for a kind of theory of everything that explains everything into one system. I think it's natural, isn't it? The way perhaps every kind of intelligence is trying to do that. But as long as if we're using that thinking intelligence to break up concepts, and then we're using the meditative approach to actually embody that of not grasping concepts, the two can play together all the time. If one is cutting through but not finding anything, and the other is learning to relax into that and recognizing what the significance of it within your own experience, so that the two sort of play together, can be very effective.
It was the letting go of time, I think, that had the most impact, because then
Right.
if everything is happening right now,
Yeah.
no past, no future, that the connection just is there.
That's right.
Everything.
That's right. A lot of the problems just disappear, don't they? But then it's very difficult to actually stay there, isn't it? Like if you're meditating and you're letting go and just resting, it's very difficult to maintain that awareness. But it's the right direction.
My biggest question
Yeah,
is maintaining it.
that's right.
And then if you maintain it, the grasping begins.
That's right, almost immediately, doesn't it? So that's why it's good that there are these other means of connecting to the adhisthana of it. Sort of like if you recognize, okay, so I just have to cooperate because that's how it is, and these habits are there. If I cooperate, it has a power from its own side to help. So I don't have to kind of maintain it, because any effort to maintain it closes it down. So I make a bit of effort to get rid of all my thinking that makes it, not obvious. And then suddenly it's obvious. And then it's almost like you open out almost in prayer, like, okay, now, and you can feel something coming from its own side. Yeah. We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken, flee. Chanchu Samni Rinpoche Machapanam Jajajik Cheba Nyamba Mapadang Kane Kandu Pelwasho Chanchu Samni Rinpoche Machapanam Jajajik Cheba Nyamba Mapadang Kane Kandu Pelwasho Chanchu Samni Rinpoche Machapanam Jajajik Jeba Nyamba Mapadang Kane Kandu Pelwasho. Thank you, everyone.